victory. All through the revolution he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, all you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
عاش الجيل الصاعد للمنشأ بمجاهد بكفاحه الخالد، عاش ابني والجاهد عاش بكفاحه الخالد، راجل واحد مبدأ واحد،
عاش جيل ثورتنا عاش.
عاش الجندي يوم ما حطم شوكة الاستعمار، كان عنوان النصر الثوري في كل بلد حرار. عاش الجندي يوم ما حطم شوكة الاستعمار، كان عنوان النصر الثوري في كل بلد حرار. وسمعنا بيقولها قوية باسم مبادئ أبية،
وسمعنا بيقولها قوية باسم مبادئ أبية.
أنا خط هجوم ودفاع، أنا رمز سلام وصراع، أفدي بالروح وأعيش في النصر بطل وشجاع. أنا خط هجوم ودفاع، أنا رمز سلام وصراع، أفدي بالروح وأعيش في النصر بطل وشجاع. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا،
عاش الجندي العربي عاش.
يوم الشمس ما حست بيها عليه، فرشت نورها وكبر الزرع وهو مداري عليه. عاش الزرع يوم الشمس ما حست بيها عليه، فرشت نورها وكبر الزرع وهو مداري عليه. وسمعناه بيقولها قوية، أرض ولادي ورجعت ليا.
وسمعنا بيقولها قوية، أرض ولادي ورجعت ليا.
حرمونا سنين وسنين وافتكروا الناس نايمين، وطلعنا عليهم يوم خلصنا حقهم ملايين. حرمونا سنين وسنين وافتكروا الناس نايمين، وطلعنا عليهم يوم خلصنا حقهم ملايين. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا،
عاش فلاح الثورة عاش.
عاش الفن حضارة الأمة يبنيها الفنان، يروى حياتها في غنوة في كلمة في صورة بروح وإيمان. عاش الفن حضارة الأمة يبنيها الفنان، يروى حياتها في غنوة في كلمة في صورة بروح وإيمان. واسمعنا بيقول
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the 1st of March 2024. Apparently it is spring, though you wouldn't know it. And we are here today to look at the recent speech, i.e. very recent, within the last 6 hours, of a certain Mr. Rishi Sunak, who is apparently the Prime Minister of Britain. And his bizarre 10-minute rant, rant would imply there was some passion in it. There really wasn't. Rishi always resembles a bank manager who's been forced out from behind his desk and forced to interact with the public in ways he's not used to. But it was as passionate as Rishi Sunak gets, I suspect, and unless, of course, we can find some stories from back on his days in the trading ground. Right, okay. Are you all hearing the sound okay? Somebody said there's no sound. Should be. Let me just check the mic. Yep, the mic's working fine apparently. Okay, so just one of you who's suffering from a no sound problem. So Rishi Sunak, in a bizarre speech in many respects, because it was a speech that was apparently triggered, and I do mean that in the literal "are you triggered" sense, by the victory of George Galloway in the Rochdale by-election yesterday. And I'll be going through the speech in just a moment, so you can all enjoy it as much as I did. And we'll be taking it apart line by line in this program, which is, of course, always a fun thing to do with the works of the beloved Prime Minister. So we're going to be doing that and comparing it to a speech given to the Russian Federal Assembly by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, which, of course, contrasts in so many ways. But I'm going to focus mainly on what it tells us about the state of both nations and the state of the systems governing them. Because this, from Sunak, was not the work of a confident man, and it was not the work of a confident system. And I'm going to be explaining why. So I'm just going to drop the live links to this into the various different social networks. And if you could, if you're enjoying the stream, be sure to like and share it. And the stream is also live on Odyssey and on Rumble. So you can watch it over there. And of course, if we get kicked off YouTube, we do have backups on there as well. So I'll be going through the chat in a moment, saying hello to those who are in there. And we'll proceed from there. So, right, here we go. And let me just, if you haven't enjoyed this, the very brief press statement by Sergei Lavrov recently, be sure to do so. I've posted it on the Telegram channel. It's where Lavrov is asked what he thought of Macron's threat to send French troops into Ukraine, and Lavrov just laughed, which is the only thing you can possibly do, to threat by little Emmanuel. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the Sunak speech in a moment, but first we will go through those who are with us in the chat. So we have Davy Capel, who says, Happy St. David's Day from the Republic of Gwynedd. Dr. Ahmed M.A., who says, Greetings, good evening, comrades from Egypt. Well, good to have you with us. Good evening to Red Star Betty out there in Durham, land of sheep and clippy mats. Homemade rug made of bits of rag similar to an Indian chindi rug, for those who are wondering. I was wondering, but thank you for letting me know. T.D. Mallard, who says, evening from an Anglo in Slovakia. Raziel, good evening to you. H.M. says, hello from the liberal dystopia of Brighton. Red Star Betty says, watching George Galloway on Sky News has been the highlight of my evening thus far. Well, he did do that idiot of a reporter up like the proverbial kipper. I mean, give credit to Galloway where credit is due. He is very good at dealing with the media. And he's very good at dealing with them because he doesn't accept, he doesn't play the bullshit verbal games that they play. And if he doesn't buy into a narrative, then he just basically rejects their question. And because he rejects the premise of their question, they can't deal with him. So like it's why he would have been probably a much better choice of dealing with the press for Corbyn than anybody he employed. Not that it would have saved Corbyn in the end. He couldn't save a man from himself. But the only way to deal with the bourgeois press is to treat them with contempt, reject the premise of their question and answer them directly. And Galloway does a very good job of displaying how you handle them. Now, he's been at it a very long time, of course, but you can also take a leaf out of Trump's book, like treat them with contempt because that's what they deserve. They're propagandists for the ruling class. They're professional liars. Treat them as they deserve to be treated, which is that they are a contemptible profession that is there to lie to people and cover up for the heinous crimes of the ruling class. These people don't deserve any respect. And that's why people loved it when Trump went after them. And people like it when Galloway goes after them. Good evening to my comrade Jason from the Class Consciousness Project. And the Raziel says, the frenzy from the establishment media has been amusing. And Rishi's ghoulish statement. Yes, we'll be getting to that in a minute. Ian Foster, good evening to you. And Red Star Betty says, MI5 are probably trying to cook up ways to get rid of Galloway as we speak. Well, we will come to Paul Mason later on. Luca, good evening to you. Kent, hello to you. And we've also got Comrade Naylor here, who's always says it's a good day whenever Paul Mason is crying online for hours. Yeah, he's been having a real meltdown. I think the man is quite unstable. He's also beginning to resemble a sort of bastard son of Heinrich Himmler look he's got these days. HM says the media reaction to Galloway's win will just make people hate them and the establishment party even more. Good point. Good evening to Peter, who joins us from the most perfidious land of Albion. Otis, good evening to you from the Democratic People's Republic of Novo Castia and Brigantes. Very fancy title. DE says, hello, quick, little Rishi, look like you're doing something. Anything. He didn't look like he was doing much. President Jesus, good afternoon to you out there in the repressive regime run by Gavin Newsom. Jawad says, yesterday I saw a heavy-handed hit piece on George Galloway by Middle East Eye. It looks like the working-class Muslims up north are still eating up Saudi propaganda. Well, evidently not all of them, but the Saudis, through their very many religious institutions and so-called charities, do exercise quite a bit of influence. And their influence is not good, wherever it is. Glad you enjoyed the intro, Ahmed. Rob, greetings to you on the other side of the Pennines. And Wolf Tone, hello to you. And Albert Roundtree says, Sunak the sepoy. Oh no, he's far too rich to have been a sepoy. We'll come to what his Indian origins are used for by the ruling class over and over again later. Ian Foster says, the slide into fascism has begun. It will only get more draconian as the imperialist crisis deepens. We need to get organised and quickly. That's entirely correct. Good evening to Jenny, who joins us, and Brad Wall and Yuan. Okay, so, right, let's then get into the meat of the issue, which is, of course, Little Rishi, alleged Prime Minister of Great Britain, has ventured forth to and is so ludicrous and so completely bizarre that I through it basically. So I'm going to add this to the screen now, if you'll just bear with me for a moment. And it's taken its time. So Rishi Sunak is apparently the Prime Minister of Great Britain. That's the wrong one. That's something. That's a TikTok video I did for the Class Consciousness Project on this very issue earlier on. So we'll add this one, which is Little Rishi trying to some sort of intimidating figure and failing completely and utterly. Right, okay, here we go. So I'm going to be pausing this as we go through it. Okay, here's the man himself. I want to make sure that you get the full spectrum of awfulness here. Right, let's go. Cue Rishi. He's looking serious.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality.
Have we? According to who? A shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality. Again, according to who? If he's referring to the demonstrations, which he goes on to mention, then the arrests that were made, including my own comrades, of course, well, the first set of charges related to racism, those were dropped because, of course, they were bullshit. So, again, he starts off with an assertion and offers no proof. Get ready for a lot of this.
What started as protests on our streets has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence.
What are the planned acts of violence? What are the planned acts of violence that he's referring to there? What's the intimidation? What are the threats? This is what they've been doing for the last, well, they've been doing it for almost 6 months now. Well, they've been doing it since the demonstration started. Remember, Suella Braverman, the sacked Home Secretary, back then decided that the marches were hate marches, and then she was bundled out the door when she tried to organize a fascist counter-demonstration. So, planned acts of violence, made up. The bursts of extremism and criminality, made up. So he's already lying and coming up with just complete bullshit straight off the bat. So you know where this is going. But what they've been doing for the past couple of weeks now, since you'll recall on a live stream we did recently talking about the controversy in the British Parliament when the Speaker of the House of Commons, in order to protect Keir Starmer, tried to sabotage a motion calling for a ceasefire put forward by the Scottish National Party. The Scottish National Party, who I'm no fan of whatsoever, but they put forward a motion which made the correct assertion that there was deliberate targeting of civilians, that essentially a genocide was going on, and that this was something, of course, Starmer didn't feel like he could vote for because he's a dedicated servant of British imperialism and all of its mass slaughters. So he tried to get Hoyle, Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, and of course a member of Labour Friends of Israel back in the day. I believe his father, Doug Hoyle, was one of the founders of Labour Friends of Israel back in the 1950s. So this runs in the family. Being a rabid imperialist is passed down, apparently, through the paternal line. I'm sure it's passed through the matriarchal line as well. Just look at the Clintons. So they've been trying over the past week to try and find some justification as to why Lindsay Hoyle refused to hear this motion. And the reason that they came up with was that, oh, well, we need to protect MPs against the campaign of intimidation. And the campaign of intimidation turned out to be peaceful protesters going to this warmongering psychopath's house, a guy named Tobias Ellwood. Tobias Ellwood is one of the most despicable characters in the British Parliament, and that is saying a lot because there's 650 of the fuckers, and I couldn't name one of them that you would piss on if they were on fire. So Ellwood really stands out because he's been screaming for full-blown war with Russia, and we'll come to Olaf Scholz's revelations about the British role in Ukraine later on. He's been screaming for assaults on the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which it turns out the British, as Kit Clarenberg correctly reported, have been behind. And he's been screaming in support of the genocide of the Palestinians. So people, quite rightly and quite frankly, not before time, did a peaceful protest outside his house. And he shit himself. Had a meltdown, screaming that he was being intimidated, thugs outside in my house. And you look at who was outside, it was a bunch of quite, respectable, rather middle-class looking people who looked like they might have just come from a Church of England bake sale, who were outside holding some signs up. Now, if you're a public official and you're going to spend the last 2 years screaming and bellowing for a war with Russia, screaming that Russia should be targeted, and now screaming full-throatedly over and over again every chance you get in defense of the genocide of the Palestinian people, and you expect to do all of that and for nobody to take offense at anything you say, nobody to call you out on it, nobody to say that, well, these aren't just words that you are speaking as a Conservative MP. You are advocating for mass murder, and you have been advocating for mass murder for 2 years, most recently in Gaza, but he should have been mass protested 2 years ago when he started agitating for a full-blown war with Russia. But you know what? I'll take what we can get here. And the protests against him were entirely correct. They were entirely peaceful, and he's a fucking coward. He's a coward who can't take any responsibility for his actions whatsoever. You don't get to scream for mass murder over and over and over again and think that your beloved parliamentary immunity means that you're not going to be subject to some kind of comeback for it. And again, entirely peaceful, not extreme in the slightest, very polite, but perhaps noisy protests outside of his home, where he wasn't even in at the time. But the idea that this is the arrogance of these people. They think that they get to do whatever they want. They get to declare that they will continue to arm and fund Israel's campaign of mass murder, that they can plot and scheme for a war with Russia, that they can intervene and destroy countries and millions upon millions of lives all over the world, and you've still got to be fucking nice to them. That's what he's saying. That's what Tobias Ellwood is screaming about. That's why Keir Starmer completely agrees with this. That's what they're getting so upset about, these protests, because these people are representatives of a very brittle system, and a very brittle system breeds very brittle people, and they can't take the tiniest pushback at all with regard to their many, many crimes. So this is a statement of the most profound weakness. And look at his face. He's soiling himself as he makes it. But let's continue.
Jewish children fearful to wear their school uniform.
Made up story, by the way. This was a story from a couple of months back. The idea that there was children at like a private school, a Jewish private school, were afraid of wearing their school uniform because they were going to get attacked. This turned out to be a made up story. So again, another lie.
Lest it reveal their identity. Muslim women abused in the street for the actions of a terrorist group they have no connection with.
And whose fault is that, by the way? Because the racist attacks against people from who are of North African, West Asian, or Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi origin, particularly in working class areas, because no one's doing a racist attack on Rishi. Whose fault is that? Could it be, Rishi, that there's been 20 years of deeply racist press campaigns against the figure of the Muslim, against the figure of the Muslim, which is conflated with the identity of the terrorist as the eternal other, that was used to justify all these wars that, well, the Labour Party was in government and waged at the time, but the Conservative Party continued? Could it be that all those press campaigns run by those newspapers and those TV channels which are now screaming about extremism, could it be that the campaigns run by them had something to do with the fact that you do get racist morons attacking people in the street? Could that be something to do with it? Could it be that there are consequences to polluting the airwaves and the press with like made up bullshit, demonizing people for decades, and then pretending that you haven't done it, of course, when the consequences come, in order to justify wars, in order to continue to reap the profits of British imperialism, which is what all of this is about? Could it be, Rishi, that the apparatus at which you sit at the head of has been fostering this for hundreds of years in actual fact, but at least for the last 20 when it comes to the figure of the Muslims, the figure of the created figure of the Muslim as the terrorist and outsider threat? So this is it. Whatever happened to these Muslim women that he's talking about? Well, it came from direct inspiration provided by a media, culture, and political system that he sits at the head of.
Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed.
They haven't been stormed. What's happened is protesters have gone to council events, and these are protesters from the areas where these local councils that they supposedly represent, and that they have gone in there and demanded that these councils back a ceasefire. That's what they've done. They haven't been stormed. He's using some sort of January the 6th style shit here. Really, this is the kind of like pearl clutching that the Hillary Clinton campaign was based on when she went up against Donald Trump. This is an extension of that, but with a sort of horrifically British twist to it. So what he's talking about there is these protesters who've gone into council chambers and essentially addressed what are supposedly their elected representatives and said, will you back a ceasefire? And of course, you look at the videos, these fucking scumbags, it doesn't matter whether it's Labour or Tory, it's the same answer, refuse to do it. They mock the people who are there. They declare them to be enemies. This is the political establishment completely closing ranks and saying, it's not just that the certain types of protest are unacceptable, that any protest which makes them uncomfortable in the slightest is going to be essentially shut down.
MPs do not feel safe in their homes.
That's Tobias Ellwood again, just so you know.
Long-standing parliamentary conventions have been upended because of safety concerns.
Wasn't because of safety concerns, as we've already covered. It was to protect Keir Starmer in order that he could vote for a motion calling for a ceasefire, but it wouldn't be a motion that would be accurately describing Israel's crimes, which the British state enables.
And it is beyond alarming that last night the Rochdale by-election returned a candidate who dismisses the horror of what happened on October the 7th, who glorifies Hezbollah and is endorsed by Nick Griffin, the racist former leader of the BNP.
Right, now, there's a lot to break down here. Of course, he doesn't name Galloway, probably in the hope that Galloway won't sue him. But Galloway should sue him, by the way, it's just if he possibly can. Now, Galloway winning the Rochdale by-election was predictable as soon as the Labour Party found that it had basically bollocksed up its selection procedure and didn't wage any kind of serious campaign. Plus, you have the rage that is attributed to the Muslim communities. But it's not just the Muslim communities. Look, I live in the Greater Manchester area, like I have done for many years now. And yes, in the Muslim areas of Greater Manchester, you will probably see, proportionally speaking, slightly more Palestine flags, and there will be a lot of people from places like Rusholme who will go on these demonstrations. But these demonstrations are a cross section of people. I mean, just talking about Greater Manchester here, because it's with reference to Rochdale, you get people from all over the city coming on these demonstrations. It's not just a Muslim thing. So that's point one. Point two is that Galloway winning it is about Gaza to a large degree, but the fact that he nearly won back in Batley and Spen a couple of years ago, when the current round, of course, of slaughter in Gaza wasn't going on, was also something that worried them. But that was much more about the fact that the political establishment in this country is absolutely fucking despised. This is something which, of course, everybody knows about. Even the Financial Times has had to admit this now. They published an opinion poll yesterday, and it's very interesting the way that they stacked this up. So if you bear with me, I'm going to try and bring in let's see if I can share this. Oh, I probably can't while I'm playing this, but the poll in the Financial Times found that trust in major British institutions, and bear in mind the Financial Times is the paper of the British financial establishment. It's probably one of the few papers that Rishi Sunak reads. And what they found was that the number of people who are recorded as having low or no trust in the political parties is over 60%. So it looks like it's around about 70% of people surveyed in an opinion poll for the Financial Times do not have any trust in, or low or no trust in the established political parties. Go to the media, same thing. Low or no trust in this opinion poll is recorded as being over 60%, almost 70%. Having high or moderately high trust for both the political parties and the news media, that's what I would refer to as the bourgeois media, is below 20%. It's below 20% of people actually trust these two pillars of British bourgeois power. What about Parliament? How do people feel about their beloved parliamentarians, who apparently must be protected because they're so amazing? Well, people, again, Financial Times survey, it's just below 60% of people have low or no trust in Parliament. Those who have high or moderately high trust is about 25%. What about international organisations, EU, UN? Low or no trust, nearly 40%. High or moderately high trust, it's around about 25%. The British government as a whole, around about 58, 59% have low or no trust, 26, 27% high or moderately high trust. What about local government, the beloved councillors? How do people feel about them? Low or no trust, 45%. High or moderately high trust, about 34, 35%. Regional civil service, low or no trust, 42%, around about. Sorry, I got that one wrong. Regional civil service, bizarrely, came out actually more trustworthy than not trustworthy. Don't know why that is. But the major institutions, so the British government, local government, the parliament itself, the press, the political parties, are all distrusted, according to opinion polls, even carried out by the Financial Times. They're a pillar of the establishment. So people fucking hate you, Rishi Sunak. People fucking hate Keir Starmer. People fucking hate the remains of the Liberal Democrats. They distrust the bourgeois press, even though they might not call it what I call it. They realise that the press is bullshitting them. So this is a system which has zero credibility, or close to zero credibility, with huge numbers, millions upon millions of people. And Rishi's going to stand there and tell you that this must be protected, and we'll come to why in just a moment.
I need to speak to you all this evening because this situation has gone on long enough.
Right, and just further to the point, because I got carried away with the opinion poll there and didn't cover the point about Galloway. George Galloway was an MP in Glasgow from 1987 until 2005. He was an MP again in Bethnal Green and Bow from 2005 to 2010. He was an MP in, I think it was Bradford West, up in Yorkshire, from 2012 to 2015. So he's been in Parliament in total for 26 years over the last 40 years. Yeah. So he's not a bolt from the blue. He was very much a sort of part of the furniture in the Labour Party for a long time. He was on it. He was a backer of John Smith back in the day. So the idea that he's an extremist is a bit of a joke. What's happened is Galloway, and I think he said this himself, hasn't really changed. He's stayed where he is. It's just that the political establishment in Britain has become so unmoored from any constraints and has become so utterly rabid and reactionary that he, who was in the middle of the Labour Party in the Kinnock period, is now regarded as an unacceptable extremist by the party that he, of course, used to be a part of. They threw him out, of course, 20 years ago. And also, why is it then that a Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who apparently has world-shaping powers at his fingertips, but perhaps not much anymore, and who has like all these apparent important problems to deal with, why is it that he is coming out and giving a press conference or a statement to the press about the winner of one by-election? Like, he's treating Galloway, and Galloway should send him a hamper because of this. This is great advertising, as if he were the leader of the opposition. Because Keir Starmer isn't, of course, an opposition, as he confirmed by endorsing Sunak's statement. So it's a bizarre and very, very weak move for Sunak to come out and essentially dedicate a 10-minute statement outside of Downing Street, broadcast on all the national news channels, to denouncing George Galloway, which is very, very strange when you think about it. And you have to ask yourself why. And we'll come back to the weakness displayed here in just a moment.
And demands a response not just from government, but from all of us. Britain is a patriotic, liberal, democratic society with a proud past and a bright future.
Well, they say that when someone is lying that he has a tell. I think Rishi's tell might be the sort of pinched look, bite of the lips and going cross-eyed, because that's certainly what's going on here. We'll come to Rishi's version of British history later on, though.
We're a reasonable country.
Who's reasonable here? Let's just pause here for a second. Liberal democratic country, we're a reasonable country. He'll keep coming back to this theme over and over again. How reasonable is it to back a genocide? Let's stick with current events. How reasonable is that? According to whose standards of reasonable behaviour should we be judging this? How reasonable is it for the Israelis to be able to send aircraft to British air bases for purposes which the Ministry of Defence will not share with us? How reasonable is that? How reasonable is it that there have been constant flights to and from Israel of military aircraft, providing Israel with some kind of equipment and or service over the last 5 months? So all the way through October, November, December, January and February. 5 months of intense activity between the British military bases on Cyprus and Israel itself. Now, that's all been reported in Declassified UK, and they have, because they are diligent journalists there, they've actually asked the Ministry of Defence for comment, and the Ministry of Defence has refused to explain any of this. So how reasonable is it to participate in something which even the International Court of Justice is essentially agreed with the case made by the South African legal team that Israel is engaged in genocidal actions? Is this the actions of a government that is reasonable? Well, because we're not talking about the country here, because Rishi Sunak and those of us in Britain watching this now and the overwhelming majority of the population, Rishi Sunak and the class he represents and the government that he runs might as well be on a different fucking planet to 85–90% of the people who live in this country. They have nothing in common with Rishi Sunak or most of the residents of the House of Commons, or never mind the ruling class that they actually represent. So he keeps trying, of course, to lump in everybody about we are a reasonable democratic country. But of course, he's not really talking about us. He's not really talking about the working class, of course. What he's talking about is, and this is quite telling because Rishi Sunak was very much the choice of the British ruling class. Remember, he couldn't even get elected on a poll of Conservative MPs or Conservative Parliament or Conservative Party members. The party members, in their wisdom, chose the idiot Liz Truss, who was essentially cooed out by the British establishment because they regarded her as essentially too erratic a figure and too close to somewhat, shall we say, too close to the roots of the Conservative Party, because the roots of the Conservative Party, the sort of petty bourgeois base of the Conservative Party, aren't actually supposed to make any decisions. They're supposed to just turn up at election time and run the Conservative clubs. They were the ones who voted for Truss. And the British ruling class basically staged a coup and got rid of her. And, you can say what you like about Liz Truss, and there's a lot to say that's negative, including her rather strange sense of where Russia's borders begin and end. She's not quite clear on that, even when she was Foreign Secretary, so leading Lavrov to mock her mercilessly. But Truss was the actually duly elected leader of the Conservative Party, not elected according to popular mandate, but this is the system we've got. And she was removed via an undemocratic coup cooked up by the City of London and the Bank of England. So Liz Truss was too much for these people. Liz fucking Truss. And they installed this guy who's now going to give you a lecture about democratic values, of course. But this is the tell. This is what he's actually talking about. Because what he's actually talking about when he says we are a reasonable democratic country, he's not talking about you or me or the people you live with or work with or your community or your workplace. He's talking about his class. And because this is why it's useful to have him as Prime Minister. And Liz Truss was just a servant of big capital. He is big capital. He is British big financial capitalism in person, in sort of human form. So it's very useful that he's here, because when he speaks, he is actually speaking for his class. So when he says, we are reasonable, we are democratic, we are liberal, what he means is we are prepared to let you have your little protest for a while. We are prepared to let you say what you like as long as nobody else listens, as long as you remain isolated. We are prepared to give you the illusion of freedom, but this has gone too far now. You are testing our patience. This is the voice of the ruling class coming directly at you. So when he's making threats for the ruling class now. Bear that in mind. This is not a person who's speaking. This is an avatar for the British ruling class themselves. So that's why it's very useful to have him here. He is their man. He is one of them. And when he speaks, he is speaking for their class interests.
and a decent people. Our story is one of progress, of great achievements and enduring values. Immigrants who have come here have integrated and contributed. They have helped write the latest chapter in our island story. They have done this without being required to give up their identity.
By that, he means that the British ruling class sees it as its right to exploit sources of labour from all over Europe and all over the world, and mercilessly exploit them as well, and then lead racist campaigns against them when things get politically difficult.
You can be a practicing Hindu and a proud Briton as I am, or a devout Muslim and a patriotic citizen as so many are, or a committed Jewish person and the heart of your local community, and all underpinned by the tolerance of our established Christian church.
The Christian church, which, by the way, nobody goes to anymore. Again, this is a speech of the ruling class, but it's a speech it's quite interesting because this is the third time I've watched it now. And you start to see that they used to be much better at presenting their version of the world as something that you should buy into. But this is purely a ruling class speech. And so you've got to wonder, well, who's this targeted at? Is it targeted just at his own class? Well, in that case, he'd be better off giving this as an after dinner speech. But this is what he's doing, I think, is he's giving the rest of us, the proles and the peasants, a warning that essentially the mask is coming off now. I think the mask has been off for quite some time, but I think whatever strings were left of it are being pulled away.
We are a country where we love our neighbours and we are building Britain together.
Really? Does Rishi Sunak love his neighbours? Well, his neighbours in London, well, maybe. I mean, I don't think he loves Jeremy Hunt too much, but he's prepared to put up with him. But does Rishi love thy neighbour as thyself, as the Bible suggests? I haven't read the Bhagavad Gita. It's a book that I should read. But I'm fairly sure, given that the ancient religious texts have a lot of things in common, like the Bible and the Quran and the Torah all suggest that you should love thy neighbour as thyself and be charitable and do good works. Is Rishi doing good works? Does Rishi love his neighbour? His neighbour in London is most likely to be a homeless man. In my last visit down to London, I walked back from where was it? I was on Oxford Street. I walked back all the way up to Euston to get my train, and there was just homeless person after homeless person after homeless person. Does Rishi Sunak care for them? No, of course he doesn't, because they are his neighbours. Those are the people who you're most likely to be next to at any point in London, or Manchester, or Liverpool, or any other major city. But London was especially bad the last time I was there, which is back in, I believe it was early November last year. Does Rishi Sunak care for them? No, of course he fucking doesn't. Rishi Sunak cares for the landlords and property developers who have made housing an unaffordable commodity and have created a homelessness crisis in the country. That's who Rishi Sunak actually cares for.
But I fear that our great achievement in building the world's most successful multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy is being deliberately undermined.
Well, actually, the most successful multi-ethnic and multi-faith democracy, if you want to go down that route, Rishi, is probably Russia right now, or possibly China. But Rishi probably doesn't understand that there's multiple religions and ethnicities in both countries. Despite being of Indian parentage, he displays all the crass ignorance and stupidity of any white bourgeois who would be in the Prime Minister's office. So a real triumph for equality here.
There are forces here at home trying to tear us apart.
Well, those forces actually are you, Rishi. I mean, the British ruling class loves tearing people apart. I mean, that's one of their go-to moves. It's one of the greatest achievements of the British ruling class has been that, despite being the longest continually existing capitalist class, though not the oldest, they are experts at keeping the working class divided. The British ruling class have cooked up, probably even more than the Americans, more religious, inter-ethnic, inter-communal conflicts across the empire and at home than any other ruling class in the world. Just look at, I mean, Rishi, how he can say these things about forces tearing us apart, how he, as a man, again, of Indian parentage, who grew up here, admittedly, but how he can stand there with a straight face and talk about the great tolerant Britain where we love our neighbours and we can't be torn apart. The British ruling class specialise in tearing people apart. It's what they do to maintain their rule. Both in, I mean, just look at how the British ruled India for many, many years, particularly towards the end, working on dividing that country up into many different, more easily dominated sections, so it couldn't develop an integrated economic system. Just look at how Britain's left all of its colonial possessions. Just look at how the British maintained their rule in the occupied 6 counties of Ireland by deliberately fueling the flames of sectarian violence when they were getting into trouble with the Republican-led civil rights movement at the end of the 1960s. The British government deliberately fueled a sectarian conflict in order to essentially put themselves in the middle of that and say that, oh, well, we're the only ones who can guarantee peace. Look at these people. They're animals. They're tearing each other apart. When they were the ones orchestrating the sectarian conflict. And we know that thanks to the fact that the even Met Police investigations into the behaviour of the Northern Ireland Special Branch, MI5, and the military intelligence units that operated in the occupied 6 counties know damn well that they were running the death squads of the loyalist paramilitaries, deliberately targeting Republican activists and civilians in Republican areas and Catholics of all varieties to deliberately create a situation of sectarian warfare, or something that could be presented as sectarian warfare, and that's just over the water. So this is shit. I mean, this is like utter shit. And if you believe this, then quite frankly, you should have your head examined. Because the record of the British ruling class is of continually creating division, continually sponsoring racism and sectarianism and all manner of division, both overseas and at home. They foster it constantly at home as well. They are behind the explosion of fascist groups. It traces back to the British ruling class all the time. He mentioned earlier on Nick fucking Griffin, the former leader of the British National Party, who put out a tweet yesterday nominally endorsing Galloway. Now, the fact that Sunak then drops that into his speech to attack Galloway made me reflect upon this today, and I was thinking that it's what you Americans call a shit-coding job. Griffin is an agent of the British state. I am certain of it. He acts for the British bourgeoisie. He has a long history of being associated with the British bourgeoisie. He represents the most militant and ultra-reactionary end of the British bourgeoisie. His various different political projects have been funded by various elements in the British ruling class. The various different fascist political organisations that he has either been a leader of or been a part of have been heavily infiltrated by British state agents. Same goes for the EDL. Same goes for the clown Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon. These are agents of the British ruling class. Same way Paul Mason is, by the way. So Griffin dropping that tweet out yesterday, to me now looks like a setup job, because he puts that out yesterday, so it's fresh in the public imagination for today, and then Sunak drops it into his speech to basically say that Galloway is a far-right extremist. Griffin is still serving the interests of the British ruling class, just as he always has. So there's a whole collection of these people who are put up as extremists, who ultimately, the origin of their movements traces back to the British ruling class. Now, with the fascists, it's legitimately the case that there is a fascist wing of the British ruling class, and always has been. But with other organisations as well, for instance, he's going to talk a lot about Islamists now. And, well, what's the worst attack carried out by an Islamic fundamentalist in recent years? It's the 2017 bombing of the Ariana Grande concert in this city in Manchester, where I am now. Now, who was the man who carried that out? Well, he was a man called Salman Abedi. Who was Salman Abedi? Well, he was the son of a man who was or he still is, I think, a member of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, a noted terrorist organization who plans to overthrow the Libyan government and institute a Salafist state. And these men, Abedi Sr. and his two sons, were allowed to travel back to Libya to fight Gaddafi in late 2010, early 2011. And then Abedi, the bomber, was given a ride back to Britain on a Royal Naval vessel. So who's sponsoring extremism here? Who are the sponsors of the Salafis in the Middle East and here? Who makes sure that they get where they need to go? Who makes sure that they're able to the ISIS bride and the various other people who are now demonized in the press? Who recruited them and made sure that they could get into Syria? Well, in the case of the ISIS bride, as she's called now, it was a Canadian intelligence asset. In the case of Abedi, well, it's clear that the British state allowed him and his father and his brother to remain in this country because they were regarded as useful assets in a future campaign against Gaddafi, and so it proved. And then he comes back here and does the bombing in 2017. So who's fostering division? Who's fostering hate? Who's fostering the extremists? It's the British state. And so for him to sit there and come out with this shit, the only people who are going to believe this really are the ruling class, bits of the ruling class themselves, who are so dumb and so far gone on their own propaganda that they actually believe this image of themselves.
Since October the 7th, there have been those trying to take advantage of the very human angst that we all feel about the terrible suffering that war brings to the innocent, to women and children.
Well, he doesn't feel any angst at all. Neither does Joe Biden. And that's not just because Biden's demented. It's because Biden, as he said in his interview with Seth Meyers, is a proud Zionist and always has been. And as he said in his more coherent days back in the 80s, were there not an Israel, we would have to create an Israel to look after our interests. And the British ruling class, of course, sponsored the Zionist project. They sponsored the creation of the Zionist state to look after their interests. And then the Americans largely took over the management of it. Rishi Sunak does not feel a damn thing for the people dying by the tens of thousands in Gaza right now. Rishi Sunak, if he looks at that at all, feels nothing, because Rishi Sunak is a pure cold-blooded sociopath. You have to be to make a success of yourself as a banker in the City of London. You have to be to become the head of this wretched government that he's the head of. You have to head the government of the British bourgeoisie. You have to be an absolutely cold-blooded sociopath who feels nothing, absolutely nothing, for the suffering which his government inflicts, not just in our own country, but around the world. He regards human life in the same way. Again, we were talking about the great Carol Reed film, The Third Man, the other night, about the great speech that Orson Welles gives in that, telling the Joseph Cotton character, would you really care if any of those dots down there stop moving forever? Well, the less charismatic version of Harry Lime is this guy. That's who rules this country. And that's their mentality, because it has to be. The capitalist is nothing but capital personified, to draw from Marx. And if you're nothing but capital personified, all traces of humanity have to be drained out of you. You can't feel for people. You can't have a crisis of conscience. If you have a crisis of conscience as a capitalist, you won't be a capitalist for too long, because you'll suddenly find that you are creating gigantic amounts of misery. There's no such thing as empathy from a capitalist. There's no such thing as sympathy from a capitalist. He is without any of that. They have ceased to be human in any real respect. They are just the soul of capital. That's who this is. That's who Rishi Sunak is. Then that's why I say it's useful that he's here in this job, because he is the soul of capital, particularly because he's a banker by trade, and now he's the head of the bourgeois government that does most of its work representing the interests of the City of London. This man, if I believed that souls existed, I would say that is a soulless man. And if we believed that this, call it a soul, call it a conscience, call it empathy, call it whatever you like, there's none in these people, which is why making moral appeals to them doesn't work, because they understand where their class interests lie, and their class interests lie in the perpetuation of the mass murder of the Palestinian people in Gaza right now, and also in the West Bank. So this is a monster. What you're looking at here is a monstrosity. Same with Biden, same with any of the others. Macron, same thing. These are horrors that rule over us in human form. That's why, you know, people laugh at the old Alex Jones thing about, it's the lizard man. Well, that's just a sort of paranoid, you know, right-wing version of it's a distorted version of the truth, which is that people feel like the rulers who rule over them are not human, because they're not, because they lack any human aspects, because they can't have any, because that's what it means to be a capitalist. That's what it means to run a capitalist system. You cannot feel anything for anybody outside of your immediate class circle.
To advance a divisive, hateful ideological agenda. On too many occasions recently, our streets have been hijacked by small groups who are hostile to our values and have no respect for our democratic traditions. Membership of our society is
Just pause there for a moment. They have no respect for the so-called democratic traditions that Rishi Sunak represents, because those democratic traditions don't represent the overwhelming majority of the British population. They certainly don't represent any of the working class, and they barely even represent the British petty bourgeois anymore. They represent nothing other than the whim of the ruling class. So if people don't respect it, it's because they've worked out that this democracy that you're talking about is just for you and your class, Rishi.
Contingent on some simple things, that you abide by the rule of law, and that change can only come through the peaceful democratic process. Threats of violence and
right, abide by the rule of law. I could mention all the times that the British government has been found to have broken the law, but I won't bother with that because it would be here too long. That change only comes through the ballot box. Actually, change comes through bureaucratic diktat, and it comes all the time. It comes through administrative changes made by the permanent bureaucracy. Comes through decisions made by the court system, which are not subject to democratic oversight. Change comes through the ballot box? No, they've very much guaranteed, especially over the last 40 years, that any remote amount of influence that the working class might have been able to have in the past, any tiny influence that they were able to have over the system, has long since been removed. And look what happened when, you know, you got like the vague and watery promises of a return to social democracy from Corbyn. Well, they destroyed him pretty damn quick. That change didn't come through the ballot box, did it? He was destroyed partially by the failures of his own political party and the failures of his own beliefs, but also there was a very deliberate campaign to destroy the very, very modest program that he stood on. So that change didn't come through the ballot box either. Did Rishi come through the ballot box? No, he didn't. Rishi was appointed by the ruling class. So again, total shite. You'd have to be an idiot to believe any of this shit.
Intimidation are alien to our way of doing things.
Intimidation is not alien to the British ruling class's way of doing things. It's a central part of the British ruling class's way of doing business. He's trying to intimidate you right now. So he's saying, now we're not into intimidation, but we'll kill you if you continue with these protests.
They must be resisted at all times. Nearly everyone in Britain supports these basic values, but there are small and vocal hostile groups who do not. Islamist extremists and the far right feed off and embolden each other. They are equally desperate to pretend that their violence is somehow justified, when actually these groups...
Right, the Islamist extremist that he's talking about, well, he's trying to label Galloway an Islamist extremist, which is just nonsense, and I hope Galloway sues him, and Liz Truss, and Steve Bannon for that matter. but also the Islamist extremists who we've been talking about, the Manchester bomber, etc., and people like Nick Griffin. Well, these are all people whose political lines can be political lineage can be traced back to the ruling class and the state. So if these characters do exist and are such a great threat to so-called democracy, well, these are all things that have been spawned by the state and by the ruling class. So, well, who's the threat here, Rishi?
Groups are two sides of the same extremist coin. Neither group, except that change in our country can only come through the peaceful democratic process. Both loathe the pluralist modern country we are. Both want to set Britain against Britain, to weaponize the evils of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred for their own ends. The faith of Islam, peacefully practiced by millions of our fellow citizens, is emphatically not the same thing as the extremist political ideology of Islamism, which aims to separate Muslims from the rest of society.
That's the same ideology that the British state promotes relentlessly in the Middle East, especially, and employs the services of in Libya and in Syria. Just look at who's actually behind, for instance, ISIS, and who's behind the various different so-called moderate rebel groups in Syria, as chronicled by Max Blumenthal, for instance, in his book, The Management of Savagery.
Islamist extremists and far-right groups are spreading a poison. That poison is extremism. It aims to drain us of our confidence in ourselves as a people and in our shared future. They want us to doubt ourselves, to doubt each other, to doubt our country's history and achievements. They want us to accept a moral equivalence between Britain and some of the most despicable regimes in the world.
Well, I wonder who he's talking about there. The whole question of whether Britain is the moral equivalent of what Rishi insists are some of the most despicable regimes in the world. Well, I wonder who he's referring to. I bet that he's referring to Russia and China, probably. That's who he's probably referring to there. He's certainly referring to Russia. Let's be clear. The British ruling class, because that's who he's actually defending here, are not the moral equivalent to the ruling group in Russia. They're not the moral equivalent to them. They're far worse than them. They're infinitely worse. The British ruling class are worse even than the cruelties and barbarities that were conjured up by the Tsardom. The British ruling class are some of the most blood-soaked, brutal, horrific bastards that have ever walked the earth. And the most annoying thing about that these days is that they don't even have the decency to be out and proud and open about their brutalities. They hide behind all these like word language games. They hide behind these pathetic characters like Rishi Sunak, who's like this sort of pen-pushing accountant who is actually a mass murderer. At least Cecil Rhodes was proud of what he did and was open about it. These fucking clowns aren't even capable of being truly honest with even themselves. They even probably believe the lies that they tell us. They believe the lies they tell about themselves because they have to.
They want us to believe that our country and the West more generally is solely responsible for the world's ills, and that
it largely is. I mean, we're talking about the world's ills. Well, if we go into all of them, we'll be here too long. But who created the Ukraine war? This is something Rishi won't address. Even according to the New York Times now, the CIA and MI6 were running large elements of the Ukrainian state for the last 10 years. They were running sabotage and assassination campaigns in the Donbass. They've been running assassination campaigns, sabotage campaigns in Russia proper. That's even according to the New York Times. And again, like we've talked to our friend of the program, Kit Clarenberg, on multiple occasions about the leaked and confirmed leaked British government plan to carry out sabotage and assassination campaigns inside Russia, run by a guy called Chris Donnelly. So in terms of who created that, who created the situation in Ukraine, Let's go back further. It's been confirmed on many occasions that the West, the wonderful West, was behind the coup there, which triggered the revolt of Donbass. So again, who's responsible for that? Well, I believe it's your beloved West, Rishi. So who's responsible for the continuation of the war? Well, according to Putin, and backed up by a source on the opposite side of the fence, the Kiev the Kiev Independent, it's the principal player there who's responsible for blocking the potential peace agreement is none other than Rishi's predecessor, or predecessor but one, a certain Mr. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. So, acting on the instructions of whoever writes Joe Biden's cue cards. So, again, who's created that war? Who's made sure that that war continues? Rishi? I think it's probably you, or more to the point, your former boss, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Biden. They're the ones who wanted it. They're the ones who created it. They're the ones who sustained it. They're the ones who are absolutely insisting that it must go on. So the West created that one. What about Israel? Well, who created Israel? I do believe it's you, Rishi. Well, not you directly, but it's the British ruling class that created Israel, and it's been sustained by the United States. Who is enabling the genocide right now? It ain't Russia. It ain't China. It's you. It's Joe Biden. Again, like the Nicaraguans are taking like the Brits and the Germans to the International Court of Justice over this. I don't think it will do much, but it's a good propaganda show, if nothing else. So two of the big trouble spots in the world, pretty much definitively created by the West, and we could go on and on and on. We could talk about the battles between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. Who created that one? Surely Rishi, as somebody of Indian extraction, you might perhaps have opinions on that, on the partition of the country that your parents came from ultimately. Or let's pick something else. Let's drag something else out of the ether. What about the ongoing, the state of, for instance, the country either known as Myanmar or Burma, who helped that set up that in the first place and did as much as they possibly could to set it up to fail. Let's move beyond Britain. Who made sure that the first leaders of independent what's now known as the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, formerly the Belgian Congo, who killed Lumumba? Who made sure that there was no chance of a even vaguely democratic future for the Congolese after independence from Belgium? Who killed Lumumba and dissolved his body in a fucking bath of acid? Well, by their own confession, that's the Belgians and the United States. Who killed UN officials who asked too many questions? Well, it's probably the United States. We could go on and on and on about this, but I think if you look at most of the major problems in the world, you'll find US imperialism and its allies or vassals stood behind them somewhere. And you won't have to go too far to find them either. Oh, and by the way, Congo is still a mess to this day, living with the legacy of the Mobutu dictatorship and the ongoing imperialist shadow wars that go on there. Still millions dead since 1997 and the overthrow of Mobutu. An ongoing war and unending horror going on there right now. And this fucking arsehole is going to stand there and tell you that the West is... How dare you compare us to the Russians and the Chinese? Actually, I agree with him. How dare we make any comparison between the rulers of Russia and China and the rulers of the West? The rulers of Russia and China, these days and historically speaking, are nowhere near as covered in blood as these fucking ghouls.
We, along with our allies, are the problem. In short,
you are the problem. If Joe Biden stopped, suddenly had a crisis of conscience, recovered the power of thought, and stopped the arms supplies to Israel tomorrow and cut it off from further funding, then the genocide would stop. Same for you, Rishi. You are responsible. You are the problem. Your class is the problem. The American ruling class is the problem. Israel is your colony.
they want to destroy our confidence and hope. We must not allow that to happen.
Yeah, we do. We do want to destroy the British ruling class's confidence in itself. And to be fair, we don't have to do much at the moment because your system is so corroded and rotten that it's destroying itself. It's eating itself. The thing is, we've got to get rid of it before it eats us.
When these groups claim that Britain is and has been on the wrong side of history,
it is on the wrong side of history. Or more to the point, not Britain as a whole. The British ruling class are on the wrong side of history constantly. Again, I won't reiterate all the atrocities and horrors that they are responsible for in the world, but again, he's talking as an offended member of his class here. This class, the British ruling class, has been on the wrong side of everything for as long as there's been a British ruling class in the modern era. I mean, since the days when the English Revolution was completed and the progressive role of the British ruling class came to an end, they've been on the wrong side of everything.
Should reject it and reject it again. No country is perfect, but I am enormously proud of the good that our country has done. Our place in history is defined by the sacrifices our people have made.
Well, it's defined by the sacrifices that many have made, Rishi. You're right about that. I mean, the place of British capitalism in history is defined by the sacrifice of millions of peasants and workers in the 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th centuries who were forced off the land, forced into factories, worked to death, for instance. The sacrifice of millions upon millions of Irish peasants in order to turn Ireland into an agricultural colony of Britain. The sacrifice of millions of Indians, of Africans. The sacrifice of millions upon millions of Africans in the slave trade. I mean, I could go on and on and on about this. But yeah, there's plenty of sacrifices been made. None of them really by the ruling class, though. All of them by the working class and by the peasantry and by the colonized peoples.
The service of their own freedom and that of others. And when these groups tell our children that they cannot and will not succeed because of who they are, when they tell children that the system is rigged against them, or that
well, if you're from a working class family, you don't need anybody to tell you that the system is rigged against you. It's pretty fucking obvious from the state of your schooling, the state of your community, and the jobs that they offer you. It's pretty fucking obvious that the system's rigged against you from a very early age. That was even the case when I was young, and that was like 20 years ago.
Britain is a racist country. This is not only a lie, but a cynical attempt to crush young dreams and turn impressionistic minds against their own society. I stand here as our country's first non-white Prime Minister.
And look how much that matters. Look how different his behaviour is to all of his white predecessors. It doesn't matter in the fucking slightest. This guy might as well be as white as I am. This colour of his skin is meaningless. What matters is the amounts in his bank account.
Leading the most diverse government in our country's history to tell.
Yes, we have a diverse set of pirates, gangsters and mass murderers running the show now. No trans people yet, but I'm sure we could find one or two to occupy a key office of state. Maybe that Conservative MP who got done for dangerous driving then declared he was a woman. Maybe we could appoint him to something. Sorry, her. Sorry, they, them. Maybe there's more than one of them. But maybe we should do that just to prove that, again, trans people too can be part of the mass murder machine. All you've got to do is have the right amount of capital in the bank account.
People of all races, all faiths and all backgrounds. It is not the colour of your skin, the God you believe in, or where you were born that will determine your success. But
no, it's your relationship to the means of production, just as it always has been. Just as it always has been, Rishi. If you own and control the means of production, then your life is going to be, well, you are, again, become the soul of capital, personified. You will live a life of much greater luxury, but you'll still be a slave of a different kind, a slave to perpetual accumulation, perhaps. But no, it's not the colour of your skin. It's not anymore. It's not the religion you believe in or don't believe in or pretend to believe in. It's your relationship to the means of production. Thank you for agreeing with me, Rishi.
just your own hard work and endeavour. And we must be prepared to stand up for our shared values in all circumstances, no matter how difficult. And I respect that the police have a tough job in policing the protests we have seen, and that they are operationally independent. But we must draw a line. Yes, you can march and protest with passion. You can demand the protection of civilian life. But no, you cannot call for violent jihad. There is no context in which it can be.
Nobody's called for that, by the way. Maybe some state provocateurs have called for that, but the calling for violent jihad, nobody said that. I mean, if this is an attempt to illegalize those who would say victory to the resistance, well, there has been a very well-established international legal precedence. If Rishi wants to go down this route to argue about, we can cite like the opinions of the UN General Assembly about the right of oppressed peoples to all kinds of resistance against their oppression, and this was cited by the Chinese lawyer at the ICJ hearing the other day about the fact that you are allowed under international law to take up arms against colonizers, against occupiers. And if Rishi really wants to have that argument, well, let's have it out. But he's using this "you cannot call for violent jihad" stuff, which nobody has done. This is another lie, to try and make it seem as if the only people who are calling for the Palestinians to win their struggle are jihadists. In actual fact, the kind of jihadists he's talking about, again, overwhelmingly, are actually not present on these demonstrations at all. It's very funny that. They're the ones who are, in bed with the British state and backing ISIS.
Acceptable to beam anti-Semitic tropes onto Big Ben in the middle of a vote on Israel-Gaza. And there can be no cause that you can use to justify the support of a prescribed terrorist group like Hamas. And yet,
better to arm a terrorist group like Al-Qaeda in Syria, like the British government has done for over a decade. That's perfectly acceptable, of course.
yes, you can freely criticize the actions of this government, or indeed any government. That is a fundamental democratic right.
Actually, it isn't. I mean, under the British constitutional system, such as it is, we don't have a constitution, unlike the United States, where I know that the constitutionally guaranteed right to free speech is, of course, constantly under attack and being undermined, but we don't have a constitutional guarantee of free speech at all. What we have is a system where you're allowed to say anything you want until it matters. That's the system that exists in Britain. You're allowed to say anything you like as long as nobody's listening. I mean, I'm under no illusions about doing this work on social media platforms. If what I was doing suddenly became very important, then, or suddenly got a massive audience and the ruling class felt threatened by it, I would be shut down like that, and they'd probably call me a terrorist. So there is no free speech in this country. There never was. And he's revealing that fact right now. He's telling you there's no such thing as free speech. He's telling you if you call for victory to the resistance, if you call for a free Palestine, if you demonstrate in a way that is not approved of by the ruling class, then they will shut down your protest and probably throw you in jail, or try to anyway. But he's being a coward about it as well, because what he's doing is he's not coming out and introducing legislation into Parliament to specifically ban these protests. That's a bit too risky for him. He is, after all, a coward. What he's trying to do is he's trying to discredit the protests. He's trying to scare people off from attending them. And he's trying to basically egg the police on to make more and more arrests. You can also expect to see the security services and various others, state agencies, employ more agents provocateurs, shall we say, in these demonstrations. You can now expect more of these jihadist groups to turn up and start making outlandish statements. You can expect all kinds of other people to pop up and start doing things that will bring the police down to carry out mass arrests. You can expect more of that now, because that's what their plan is, to ultimately divide people, to destroy the momentum that these demonstrations have built up, to chase them off the streets. That's what they want to do. They don't want to come out and ban them. They want to find reasons to essentially scare people away from them. So that's what they're trying to do. They've got the powers under various different laws going back, way back into the 19th century, to ban demonstrations. They've always had them. They generally don't use them, though, because most protests in Britain over the last 20 years or so have petered out because the people that led them into a dead fucking end. So what he's doing here, he's basically trying to scare people away from the demonstrations. He's implying that a crackdown is coming. Now, and he's also putting pressure on the and also giving license to the police to make more and more arrests. Even if the charges don't stand up, they can, intimidate you, throw you in the cells for 24 hours, raid your home, and that's going to be enough to put some people off going. But of course, we should not be intimidated by this, and I think not just in London but everywhere on these demonstrations in the near future, this should be answered by having more and more people come out on them. And that's the best way to answer him, because clearly, if not Sunak himself, because I doubt that he wrote this speech or decided to do it of his own volition, clearly there's a big section of the British ruling class who are triggered by this and are terrified of it and hate the sight of what is going on with these demonstrations. There's all the more reason to have more of them.
But no, you cannot use that as an excuse to call for the eradication of a state or any kind of hatred or anti-Semitism.
Rishi Sunak and co are actively trying to eradicate the Russian state right now. That was their plan in Ukraine, by the way. And there's been people openly calling for the eradication of the Russian state in the British press for over 2 years. Apparently that's acceptable, though. You can call for the eradication of Russia. You can call for the eradication of China. You can call for the overthrow of its government. You can say that Russia and China should be broken up into their component parts. You can do all of that, and you can have a column in the Daily Telegraph, the New Statesman, or the Spectator. So again, it depends upon which country you're calling for to be brought to an end. If you're calling for Russia to be brought to an end, you can have a very successful career in the media or academia. So again, this is a piece of bullshit. This is, again, the demonstration of the fact that the only rule that really matters in Britain is the rule set by the ruling class. And they can call for the destruction of countries. They can call for the destruction of countries that are their enemies. But you can't call for the ending of the Zionist colonial state of Israel. If you do that, then they'll come and lock you up. That's what he's saying.
This week, I've met with senior police officers and made clear it is the public's expectation that they will not merely manage these protests, but police them.
Well, what he's saying there is basically he's told the police chiefs that he expects them to make more arrests. That's what he's told them. And he's, as for the public's expectation, by the public, he means the ruling class. That's what he means. When all references to the public in this, Don, do not refer to the general British population. What they refer to is the conversations he's had with his City of London friends, where they're all very upset about these people being on the streets. That's what he means.
And I say this to the police: we will back you when you take action. But if we are asking more of the police, we in government must also back up that call with action. To that end, this month the government will implement a new, robust framework for how it deals with this issue, to ensure that we are dealing with the root causes of this problem, and that no extremist organisations or individuals are being lent legitimacy by their actions and interactions with central government. You cannot be part of our civic life if your agenda is to tear it down.
Well, I don't want to be part of your civic life. Your bourgeois press and media and culture sphere is a bunch of propaganda. The alleged culture that the British ruling class produces is all shit. You can keep your civic life. We'll make our own. Thank you very much.
We will redouble our support for the PREVENT programme.
Right. Just a note for those who don't know. Brits may know what the PREVENT programme is, but for those that don't, the PREVENT programme is essentially a British version of what the the bourgeois press and academia and their pet historians like that fucking hack Anthony Beaver will tell you what the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, and the Stasi used to be, or what the KGB used to be. That's the cartoon image they give to you about what those organizations were. That is the reality of what the PREVENT program is. The PREVENT program seeks to recruit every single public sector worker, be they a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, never mind just those who are in the police and security services, and gets them to report anybody who is in their care or is working with them, or who they encounter in their professional life, who is displaying extremist opinions. And I've heard examples of like children who say the wrong thing in class being reported by some arsehole of a teacher to the PREVENT program and being forced to go to some like lectures of their parents being questioned. Like, this is a spy program which seeks to recruit all of the public sector as its spies so that they can bully, intimidate and harass people into not expressing unacceptable opinions. Now, this started over 10 years ago. And I remember 10 years ago, I was working at the time in the trade union movement with a couple of people who were Unite reps at it was Manchester Royal Infirmary. These people were working in one of the tech side of things there, and they tried to make Unite, the trade union, wake up to the reality of what the PREVENT program was and what it was going to be used for in the future. Because at the time, bear in mind, this is 2014. We're in the middle still of that version of the Islamic panic created by the British ruling class, and it was presented as, oh well, it's designed to stop children from Islamic backgrounds being radicalised. But of course, it was never about that. Not really. It was about creating essentially the architecture for a more aggressive police state, so that anybody who expressed any opinion that was even remotely out of line would be subjected to an inquiry, would have their children threatened, would have their livelihoods threatened, would be intimidated into silence. That's what the PREVENT program actually is. And these two reps from Unite, to be fair to them, I think their politics and mine would be pretty far apart these days, but they went to Unite, their local branch, and they tried to get their trade union interested in opposing this. Not fucking interested. The Unite branch leadership didn't want to know. The Unite regional leadership didn't want to know. TUC regional and national level didn't want to know either. And so this cruised through with no objections from the trade union side that I could see whatsoever. And now it's established public sector policy that basically public sector workers have to report anybody who's seen as a radical or an extremist. Now, of course, they don't have to do it, but there's plenty of fucking rats who work in the public sector who would turn in their own mother for a pat on the head from the manager. And that's the PREVENT program. And that's what he's talking about here.
Stop young minds being poisoned by extremism.
So what he's talking about there, saying we're going to prevent young minds being poisoned by extremism, he means that we're going to brainwash the kids more. That's what he means.
We will demand that universities stop extremist activity on campus. We will also act to prevent...
So it's a free speech clampdown. You basically, if you're a member of a Palestinian solidarity group on a university campus in Britain, they're going to come after you. If you're a member of any group which is deemed to be unacceptable by the government on a university campus, your free speech rights don't exist. They are going to come and try and shut down your society, try and stop you organising events, try and stop you using university facilities. This is what's happening now. And he's openly saying it.
Prevent people entering this country whose aim is to undermine its values. The Home Secretary has instructed that if those here on visas choose to spew hate or protest or seek to intimidate people, we will remove their right to be here. And our Britain must not be a country in which we descend into polarised camps, with some communities living parallel lives. It is not enough to live side by side. We must live together, united by shared values and a shared...
Well, what the hell are those shared values? No one has been really able to tell me. And again, what he means by living parallel lives is he's going back to the old. Having said he's against Islamophobia, he's now engaging in it, because this was a big thing 20 odd years ago, just after 9/11 and in the middle of the original Islamic panic, declaring that this was largely targeted at Muslim communities, especially Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, etc., about them not integrating. You're not integrating into British society, etc. Well, if they're not, well, that's partially, at least, down to the fact that the way that the British ruling class designed things, as I've already said, to make sure that the different working class communities didn't come together as a class. So the division within British society has been very deliberately fostered by the ruling class for a very long time. And now they turn around and make demagogic statements about it. Again, don't take these people seriously at all.
Shared commitment to this country. And I want to speak directly to those who choose to continue to protest.
Here comes the threat.
Don't let the extremists hijack your marches. You have a chance in the coming weeks to show that you can protest decently, peacefully, and with...
They've all been peaceful. There's been no violence at any of these protests. He's making this up. Keep this in mind.
Empathy for your fellow citizens. Let us prove these extremists wrong and show them that even when we disagree, we will never be disunited from our common values of decency and respect.
You are not a decent man, Rishi Sunak. We've already covered this in great depth about what kind of man you actually are. The values that your class represents are on display right now in Gaza and in eastern Ukraine. They are the values represented by this deliberate starvation of children. That is what your values look like in practice. Israel is enacting the values of the British ruling class in practice. It means starving children to death. It means shooting people trying to get food aid. It means dropping high explosive bombs on densely packed civilian populated areas. It means Israeli soldiers executing people in the street who are unarmed and who have surrendered. It means running over captured men with tanks and crushing them. It means carpet bombing whole areas. It means ensuring that proxy wars continue even after over 400,000 Ukrainians have died. Those are the values that he represents. That's what the British ruling class represents. It's not what most people in this country represent. And if you want this country to be any better to what it is right now, then Rishi and his class have to be removed from power. If any of this makes you angry, if any of this makes you think that this is bullshit and these people don't represent me, well, they don't. They don't represent you or me or 90-odd% of the country. They represent the tiny minority of parasites at the top, the tiny minority of the capitalist class. And he is them personified, and that's who he's speaking for. So if you're upset by this and you think that these people are a joke and you want to see them got rid of, and if you think this country is running itself into the ground or being run into the ground, it is being run into the ground because the system's decaying and it's run by clowns like him on behalf of his class. So if you want any of this to change, then this class has to be removed from power, and they have to have their wealth removed from them. They have to have their political power removed from them, and they have to be given a choice. Either stay, become part of the proletariat and help us build a new Britain, or get on a plane and go into exile. That's the choice that will be presented to the entire ruling class. If you choose to stay and make trouble, then the future dictatorship of the proletariat will treat you as you deserve to be treated, as you have treated your class enemies over the years.
I love this country.
No, you don't. You don't love this country. You love the class that you're in. You love owning bits of this country. Because you're a representative of the ruling class, you don't like the people here. You don't like 90% of the population. You despise the working class, quite naturally. You're a member of the ruling class. Why would it be any other way? If you despise and regard as your enemies, and indeed you are our enemy, if you think that 90% of the population is there to be essentially exploited and abused by you, if you see that as your right, then you don't love this country. You don't love the people. You don't love the land. You see the land as something to be owned and profited from and controlled by you. You see the people as a barrier to making money. You see them only as something which is fit to be subjected to exploitation. If they can't be exploited, then they can fuck off and die. And if they get in the way, then they can fuck off and die. You don't love this country at all. You love owning bits of it. And that is why you are happy to see it run into the ground. The British ruling class would burn Britain down to a cinder rather than give up a tiny proportion of their power. So therefore, all of their power and all of their money and all of their wealth must be taken off them. If we are to make this country even a little bit better, these people, this class, has to go.
Family and I owe it so much. The time has now come for us all to stand together to combat the forces of division and beat this poison. We must face down the extremists who would tear us apart. There must be leadership, not pandering or appeasement. When they tell their lies, we will tell the truth. When they try and sap our confidence, we will redouble our efforts. And when they try and make us doubt each other, we will dig deeper for that extra ounce of compassion and empathy that they want us to believe doesn't exist, but that I know does. If we do that, we can build on our great achievement in creating today's Britain, a country of kind, decent, tolerant people. We can make this a country in which we all feel a renewed sense of pride. This is our home. So let us go forward together, confident in our values and confident in our future.
And with that, the Prime Minister scurries off back into 10 Downing Street, taking no questions from the audience, if there was one. So that's there passes Rishi Sunak, last of his name. And there's his statement on things. So I think it's fairly clear what that was. It was basically a threat to ban future demonstrations. It's a threat to impose, well, what's already there. The framework for a police state in Britain is already there. It's been there for decades. It's just most of the time they haven't used it for the reasons I've specified already. What that was, though, a remarkably weak and pathetic statement. It's not the statement of a ruling class that is particularly confident. It's not the statement of a ruling class that is in any way feeling like it's in control of events. It's a statement of a ruling class that is low on confidence, that is easily frightened, that is terrified of what it sees in front of it, that's terrified by the fact that the Russians are advancing and that their proxy war has gone hideously wrong, that their long-term colonial project in the Middle East is going all wrong, that their influence in by the fact that they are being pushed out of different markets as more countries assert their sovereignty. This is a ruling class that is down, and you can tell that they are on the way down because what they are manifesting is this huge lack of confidence. A confident ruling class would not be bothered by the election of George Galloway as the sole representative of the Workers' Party of Britain in Parliament. As I said, Galloway got into Parliament in 2005 and in 2012. It didn't result in this ruling class freakout. The ruling class freakout is coming because they know on some level that their position is weakening. That they know on some level that the future does not belong to them and that they are slowly diminishing. And that is why he's had this freakout. This is coming from a position of profound weakness. The idea that the Prime Minister of Great Britain would devote any amount of time, but a certain time in prime time news hours, to go out and denouncing one MP, to go out and do that, and to expect to get some kind of like positive result out of it, it's going to win Galloway more supporters, than he could have ever have got in a million years, this denunciation. Sunak's done him in many respects a big favour. But we should all be prepared for the next phase. The next phase is coming, and that is going to be, of course, a crackdown on any democratic rights. They are going to try and the first stage is they're going to try and intimidate people from going on these demonstrations, which we must answer by getting more and more people out to these demonstrations. The next phase will be that they'll try and lock up more people by staging provocations at the demonstrations, by employing various provocateurs. We've got to bear in mind that that's going to be a thing, so be on our guard for that. Will they even allow Galloway to take his seat in Parliament? It would be a bit of a risk if they did try to bar him, but Paul Mason, I know not a particularly serious figure, but a man who does express what is being talked about in certain ruling class circles, because those are the circles that this agent of the state moves in, well, he is calling for Galloway to be prosecuted, specifically if he repeats Russian propaganda, meaning if Galloway in Parliament tells the truth about the Ukraine war, especially that. They really don't want the truth getting out about that, and the British government's role in it, then he should be prosecuted. That's coming from former BBC journalist Agent Paul Mason. So they are clearly gearing up for some kind of assault here. If they try and block Galloway from taking his seat in Parliament, there must be mass protests. Galloway, again, must be supported in taking the seat he has under the ruling class's own rules, won at this by-election. And any attempt to block him must be vigorously opposed. But I welcome this statement from Rishi Sunak. I welcome the fact that a member of the ruling class has come out and basically had a public shit fit and meltdown about the protests that have been going on for the last 5 months. I'm glad it's bothering him, and I'm glad he's come out and gone mask off on this shit, because now we all know what we're dealing with. Now we all know that the protests are getting under their skin, that it is bothering them, and therefore that's all the more reason to continue it. But we are in for a rough ride in this country, and I would say most of the rest of Europe. I think America maybe is a slightly different kettle of fish at the moment, because there's more room for, there appears to be a little bit more room for dissent over there, but not by much. So the entire imperialist bloc is in crisis, and as the ruling classes see this crisis and are unable to respond to it, they panic and they freak out more and more and more and more and more, and they reach for the only tool that they know how to use, which is the policeman's baton, the jailer's keys, the prison system, the court system, the intelligence services. Repression of dissenting points of view is the only thing they know how to do, and that's what we must be prepared for. Right, okay, let's pause here for any comments. We've got a lot of comments in the house. We've got 106 of you viewing right now. Excellent stuff, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Right. There's a lot of comments there. I probably can't go through all of them by the end of this, but I'll settle for a couple of them in particular. Naylor says Sunak is the first token. Yeah, well, as I said, they're happy to have you at the top as long as your relationship to the means of production is what they regard as the right way, is the right one. Jay Spartacus says his next speech will be, "You all failed, so now I have to impose new laws against you." Well, he doesn't actually need new laws. I mean, he's got all of the repressive apparatus he could possibly want at his disposal. Lurtis says Sunak sounds like a third-rate Thatcher. Well, I would say more like he sounds like a sort of bad copy of Tony Blair. So like David Cameron was the original copy of Tony Blair. Then we got Boris, who was sort of different. He had a different brand. And now we get Sunak, who is a really bad copy of Tony Blair. So yeah, this is what's going on here. It's we are now having Tony Blair impersonators rulers. Rishi owns at least 4 homes in Britain, by the way, as somebody pointed out in the chat. Ash says, I thought this dingbat could call an election, but he seems to be scared after the Rochdale loss. Yeah, I thought it was going to be an election call as well. I'm surprised it wasn't. I mean, I sort of expected at the end of his speech there that he would go and say, and that's why we're calling an election on the grounds of we need to reinforce democracy against extremism. I'm surprised that he didn't go for that, but maybe he's worried about something. Right. No, to answer the question that came up in the chat, can they, Grassy Knoll says, can they stop him in reference to Galloway taking his seat? They may try. I don't think they legally can at the moment, but there's going to be all kinds of attempts to stitch up Galloway, I'm sure. I mean, the media's already tried to do it, but he's too good at dealing with them. He's too effective at dealing with them to let them do to him what they've done to others. So, yeah. Jenny says, I immediately thought of the George W. Bush era when I heard him. Yep, maybe that's the case. So, yes, we are now at the 5 to midnight mark. So I didn't get time to go into the Putin speech, so we're going to have to do that over the course of the weekend. I'm going to draw things to a close because I have to be up fairly early tomorrow. I'm heading over to Liverpool way to join with my Scouse comrades in doing some work for campaigning for the CPGBML over there, building up our presence in the city. So if you're in Liverpool way tomorrow, maybe we'll see you. But thanks to everybody who has contributed to a very active chat tonight. I've got to get on now and go hit the hay, so to speak. So thanks to everybody who's joined us. This will be up on the Patreon site. Thanks to everybody who's subscribed to the channel, by the way. We've hit 2,000 subscriptions recently. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification button. So until the same time tomorrow, I thank everybody for tuning in, and I'll be back with you again in 24 hours.